Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Here he is. Hi, hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, November 2nd, 2022. That's a lot of twos. Although I did see earlier on, as Greg was preparing his Rafto stories, he says the number of the day is 33, and then I missed the explanation for it. Justice, who now says levels are 5 by 5, suggests that the number of the day is 5. Your lottery numbers for today, 2, 22, 5, I guess 11, we'll throw that in there, and 33. And that's probably meaningful in some way. And if these numbers turn up and I don't, buy a ticket and win, I'm going to be really pissed. But if you do, send me $10 a month. Why not? Hey. And I'll just leave the show on for 187,000 years, and then it'll be like the same thing. Okay. Well, lots to cover today. I don't know what any of it is, but I have the feeling that there's a lot to cover. So that's good. Happened to see a very interesting reminder, as you always get, from Jameson Foser, who's tweeting the following today, or he is, I guess, to set the stage for what he's tweeting, he picks up on the tweet of, who's this? Paul Farhi, F-A-R-H-I, who writes about the news media for the Washington Post, and so you've likely run into him on Twitter or in the Washington Post, or hey, maybe even on the street. It does say that he writes random inexplicable tweets about other stuff. So who knows, he could show up in your life inexplicably as well. And he tweets that there were 1,542 news stories about so-called rainbow fentanyl in the 2 months before Halloween, most warning that drug dealers, who usually sell this thing for money, could instead, for free, slip the drug into trick-or-treating kids' candies and thereby fool them into, one, either dying, because, of course, if you touch or look at or even think about fentanyl for long enough, you just drop dead right in your shoes, and there's nothing you can do about it. That, of course, only happens to cops, who everyone loves because they're first responders. USA, number one. I don't know. That just seems like something you would say afterwards. And two, of course, they usually sell drugs for profit. And this time they would be slipping all these drugs into people's candies, presumably, as we said, the economists would tell us, as loss leaders, so that kids would then become hooked and come back to them as repeat paying customers. There's really no explanation for why it would happen. Kids would, of course, have no idea what it was unless they found the fentanyl in its raw form, not pushed into a Milky Way or something like that, and then said, hey, what's this colorful pill that actually doesn't look very much like candy at all, because the candy I'm after is chocolate, although presumably you could say they look a little bit like Pez or Nerds or whatever. Most kids are pretty well trained about what candy should be wrapped in, etc., but I'm sure that if they found pharmaceuticals, I don't know. We were told kids were eating Tide Pods, so I guess anything is possible. But then they would eat them, and then they would say, I need to go to the store that sells these immediately because I love them so much. I'm going to break into my piggy bank and become a repeat customer. The whole scenario was foolish and stupid to begin with, but yet they did run 1,500 plus stories. And usually I imagine newsrooms are saying, well, I don't want to be the local newspaper that didn't warn parents, only to find that here in Podunk, the fentanyl showed up after all, and kids ate it because they thought it was candy, despite all the other warning signs, etc., because the Podunk Post and Eagle didn't, in its one weekly edition, print that there was fentanyl on the loose out here. And, all the kids are checking the Post and Eagle before they go trick-or-treating these days. You know how it is with their computers. Anyway, so I guess nobody wanted to be left out on that one. Paul concludes by pointing out, and then linking to his article about this, could read that, but he says there hasn't been a single story today, this of course would have been yesterday that he wrote this, confirming that this happened. anywhere in the United States. 1,500 plus stories about fentanyl, not a single story about fentanyl showing up in anybody's trick-or-treating candies or anything like that. Meanwhile, by the way, there will probably have been, 50 or so accidental shootings along the way. But it's something that happens every Halloween. We get warned about that. But of course, every New Year's and every 4th of July, we're warned about celebratory gunfire. And then that does happen, and then people die, and we still can't stop that. But here we are. Anyway, I guess you could say we successfully stopped all the fentanyl from being distributed in Halloween candy. Jameson points out, though, by the way, a much better interpretation of this. Why were there 1,500 plus news stories about rainbow fentanyl and then no reports anywhere of it happening anywhere? This is obviously because those stories weren't about a real thing. But more importantly, they were news. What were they about? They weren't about a real thing. The one real thing that was involved, they were about news companies going along with Republicans in pretending that a fake thing was a real thing in order to scare people into voting against Democrats. Crime is rampant. You got to do something about the crime. It's so rampant, they're going to try to murder your kids with fentanyl in the Halloween candy. P.S. We also tried to murder the Speaker of the House while you were watching, but never mind that. It's all about other stuff. People get hit with hammers every day. There's rumors that it was a gay lovers triangle gone wrong, a drug deal gone wrong, that he smashed the window himself, that they were friends. All sorts of rumors circulating about that. That they'll never get back to. But at any rate, there you have it. So, but I think that's a good point. That I guess the news media said, we better spread this Republican lie. They may not have thought of it as it's very possible, smaller paper, any papers really. Is it a Republican lie meant to scare people about the crime rate so that they vote for Democrats? Or is it, hey, we're just trying to make sure kids are safe. So what's the downside of running a story about a thing that won't happen, especially if it turns out that it didn't happen in the end anyway? We can all mop our brow and say, phew, it was because the Podunk Post and Eagle warned everybody in just in the nick of time. But I don't know, he's got a point there. Everybody decided that there was no downside to this kind of scaremongering and ran the stories. And I mean, everybody should have egg on their faces about this one, except don't eat the eggs because they're full of fentanyl. And there's no apology because we were just warning you, just keeping you safe. And sure, nobody got hurt. That's a good thing that nobody got hurt. Or maybe you should take stock and say, this one was particularly dumb. And it might not, be a bad idea to say. Also, we've kind of been doing this every Halloween for about 30 years. There's drug needles in your, there's, poison of various kinds, all sorts of things. Every year they come up with one of these things. And every year it's a total bust. And every year they run another one because, I don't know, I guess they're thinking just in case. It's a very odd thing. I'll just point that out, and I think Jameson makes a good point in pointing out that eventually they should say, this might be, by design, and if it's by design by a political party, and when October, or when Halloween rolls around, it's always right before an election day. Every year, somewhere is election day, immediately following Halloween. Shouldn't we give this a second thought? And apparently, for 35 years in a row, the answer has been no. Greg Dworkin is here. He's waited about 35 years for his turn to talk. Now it's your turn. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
All right. How are the dogs today?
The dogs are okay.
All right.
So far,
they're
in separate rooms, so you won't be hearing them until they get together. But,
okay. This is
right now the little one
Nevada
we're watching is quiet. So
great. I mean, they were quiet. They were fine. We enjoyed hearing them. Okay.
Yeah, well, just every once in a while you hear something in the background, and I just thought
I may bark. You never know.
Yeah. So, the thing about Halloween, I like the tweets that, have been pointing out things like, well, I opened up my Milky Way bar I got for Halloween, and right in the middle of it was The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and I opened up the other candy, and so were a bunch of other banned books. So be very careful with Halloween, because you never know what you're getting.
That's right. There was a drag queen in my candy today.
So all sorts of stuff.
Eating it, but all right, yeah.
We're gonna start international, as we sometimes do, just to make sure I don't forget to talk about it, because these things are interesting and sometimes have implications here. For example, in England, You'd think that Rishi Sunak, the new prime minister, who's there for a stable, calm, no drama, would be just on his way to trying to restore a little bit of order
Whoa, yes.
in merry old England. But in fact, still lots of fallout over Liz Truss firing the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman.
Oh, yeah, right.
It's kind of a racist and inflammatory figure, and therefore beloved on the right.
Oh, all right.
And then Rishi Sunak, in a move to try to reconcile and bring the party together, rehires her as, wait for it, Home Secretary, position that she had been fired from. And her inflammatory comments about immigrants gets her in trouble again, plus consideration that perhaps she's, leaked stuff in inappropriate ways, butter emails kind of style. And so, they just keep arguing about that. And it's not really clear they're making a whole lot of progress to righting the ship, as you might say.
Yes.
And perhaps the bigger story internationally is in Israel, where there were elections yesterday. And it looks like Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu, will be back in power.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, boy. Like a volt. And so the whole thing is odd in the following sense. Israel is made up of factions, and the factions group together for power.
Yeah, that's normal-ish.
The number I'm going to tell you to try to remember, the number of the day is 33.
Right, yes, I saw that, and this is where that comes from. All right,
okay.
Why?
So, because Benjamin Netanyahu's party, Likud, looks like they're on track to get 32 seats. And you need 60 in order to govern.
Right, you need 60 votes to do anything.
Okay.
Anywhere in the world.
33 is coming from Netanyahu's allies on the right, who will certainly vote for him to be prime minister.
Okay.
But the makeup of that is a little different than in previous Netanyahu administrations.
All right.
14 of the 33 are the religious Zionists. This is the Meir Kahane party.
Okay.
Who are just out and out racist and homophobes.
Yes, that's what people
and
say.
Then between Shas, which is a religious party of what in the U.S. we would think of as Sephardic religious Jews.
Okay.
And United Torah, which is just overall Orthodox, like the Hasidic Jews here, they make up 19. So Shas, United Torah, and religious Zionists together are 33.
Okay.
That's one more than Netanyahu's party of Likud. Why does that matter? It's enough to give him the prime minister.
Right, it's 60
seat.
plus.
But the leader of the religious Zionists is an up-and-coming politician, again, racist and Meir Kahane style guy, Itamar Ben-Gvir, G-V-I-R. Okay?
Gvir, okay.
Now,
Like
Netanyahu does not like rivals. Think of it as how Donald Trump views the governor of Florida.
Yes.
Ron DeSantis.
He'll take help, but he wants
He'll
to
take
sure
help,
everybody
but he's
knows
not going to do
the king.
anything to make him more powerful.
Right. Okay.
And it turns out the coalition, which arguably, based on the election, Ben-Gvir is leader of, has one more seat than Netanyahu. Netanyahu hates that.
Now. All right.
So he'll have to ally with them to get power, but his previous ways of doing business is to do things like the second leading party in the election, Lapid, who's the current prime minister. His party got 24. Okay. And the National Unity Party of Benny Gantz got 12.
All right.
Now, Gantz is like a center-right party. And Gantz has said he would never sit with Netanyahu.
All right.
So the obvious thing to do for Netanyahu
This is a seating
is to ally with Gantz. Right? And take the two religious parties and Gantz's party and get enough to be 60, thereby excluding the religious Zionists from power, and thereby excluding his Ron DeSantis in the way that they get along rival.
Okay.
And Netanyahu's perfectly capable of doing something like that. Now, will he? We don't know. And those parties aren't solid blocks. The National Unity Party of Gantz is actually a coalition, and so he could break up this piece, he could break up part of the religious Zionist piece, and sort of cobble together a coalition of sub-parties within those parties,
I guess.
any way he can to keep Ben-Gvir from getting too much power. So that's really to watch for at this point. But the sad news is that Netanyahu will be prime minister regardless. There are still 500,000 votes outstanding, and that's why Lapid hasn't conceded yet. And it may well be that Netanyahu's coalition gets less total votes, like our electoral college.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Yeah, great. I mean, it's bragging rights. But if that should happen, that gives impetus for Netanyahu to say, well, that's why I had to ally with Benny Gantz's centrist party and not the others, because look at the results of the vote total. So, don't feel like you were screwed out of everything, even though I screwed you out of everything. You should understand that that's what the vote says.
I see.
And so on and so forth.
Well, that is
so
more
that's the kind of
responsive than our
maneuvering that
electoral
Netanyahu
college.
is famous for, and that's what we'll be looking for in the next few days. But
All right.
any way you slice it,
How exciting.
the right took power in Israel, and why? Same reasons here. High cost of living, and current government is being blamed for that because that's just what happens, and security issues. And the weird part is that this Benny Gantz National Unity Party is basically based on chief of staff and former generals and those who are in charge of the very popular Israeli armed forces, trying to keep, for example, settlements in the West Bank safe.
Yeah.
And in effect, the population voted for the settlers rather than the army.
Well,
So just because you've been in the army and you've been keeping us safe, that doesn't make us feel that you're keeping us safe. We'd rather side with the settlers who are demanding more, because that's just the as you might call it, the fundamentals in Israel.
I guess.
So what lessons do we learn here? Well, fundamentals matter. And so you can have better candidates and worse candidates, and the worst candidate could still win. And that's, what may happen, for example, in Ohio with J.D. Vance, who's clearly an inferior candidate to Tim Ryan by any way you look at it.
Yes.
But if the national environment favors you or your local state environment favors you, it may not matter.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, that may be true in other places.
Right.
Nevada, New Hampshire, Georgia, Pennsylvania. Right. We don't know yet.
Well,
Oz
pretty
is
much
a
everywhere.
terrible candidate. He may wind up winning.
Yeah.
There's even a new poll out today saying that Don Bolduc may wind up winning in New Hampshire. Yeah, the polls might be wrong, but the point is that the environment is pushing people to, especially those who decide elections, which are the people that don't pay attention to politics.
Yay.
Right? Who say that, I don't know, just I don't like the way things are and you're in power, so let me give the other guy a chance.
Right.
Well, the other guy's a Nazi. Well, but I don't know that. I don't know that much about politics.
I believe the
I just know
story.
that he's not the guy in power.
Right. I'm against all of them, and I'll be against this one soon too. But for now,
but not for this election.
Yeah. All right. Wait. Well, let's hope for better.
Now, the polls can be wrong, and there's a whole lot of thinking that says that maybe they are this year.
Okay.
But the polls are pretty consistent, and so there's that.
Okay.
And there was one interesting pushback against the idea that, Republicans are flooding the zone with all this stuff. Bill McIntyre is a Republican pollster. I forget whether we talked about it yesterday, but if we did, it's worth repeating.
It wasn't yesterday.
New outrage coverage, GOP-aligned pollsters flooding the zone and tipping the RCP average, real clear politic average, toward the GOP. Is that real? Do you think every Democratic candidate and group stopped polling, not releasing, because it's all grim for them? If they had a counter story, they'd release their own data. It's not that complicated. The polls are the polls.
Yeah. All right. I can see
That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure, why not? I mean, I think there's validity to both points.
Yeah, and Semaphore,
Somehow.
that new startup, actually is turning out to be pretty good. They have good stories. Here's one that I have in the
Yeah, they're
pundit
finally
roundup.
telling us what their stories are.
Democrats hope a tidal wave of Republican-sponsored polls aren't midterm reality. The midterm campaign is basically cooked at this point, meaning there's only one thing left to do, and that's argue over the polls. Democrats are publicly questioning the narrative of red wave, pointing to an influx of polls sponsored by Republicans or allied groups in critical races around the country. Simon Rosenberg, Democratic strategist, says he recently analyzed public polls in 8 battlegrounds and found Republican polls dominating surveys. He argued it was evidence of an apparent effort to gain the poll averages. That's why McInturf is arguing now. It's just because, that's what the polls say. So, is it? Is it not? We don't know. We have those.
That's clearly what they say.
We have a week to find out, less than a week, because next Tuesday is coming up pretty quick. And then the other side of the polling situation is, of course, the early vote. And what can you make of the early vote? Usually not much, because you don't know how people are voting. You certainly don't know how the independents vote. You don't know who's going to show up on election day. Some places like Georgia, you don't even know which party they are. You can only look at demographics about age and white versus black, male versus female, and that doesn't tell you enough to really know how they're voting, only that they're voting.
Right.
We do know Republicans are showing up. We do know Democrats are showing up. That's all we know. The only place where you can really get a better handle on that is Nevada, and that's because John Ralston just tracks this so much, and that's because so much of the early vote, comes in relative to the general election that you can, sort of get a sense of what's going on. He figures probably 40% of the vote's already in. And guess what? It's a really close race.
Yes, and it's close between those who have gotten their votes in and those who haven't.
Right. Now, the mail and the vote overall, unlike Georgia, which is setting records, is not all that vigorous.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So if you're looking at percentage compared to pick a year, probably 2018 is a better year because it's a non-presidential year.
It was a good year.
It does look like the vote relative to that is lower. And Republicans are doing a couple of points better. Democrats are doing a couple of points worse. Democrats had a reasonably good mail vote yesterday. Republicans had a reasonably good in-person vote yesterday. It's typically how they vote. And John Samuelson, who follows this very closely, points hidden gem for Democrats. Voters got quite a bit younger, with less than 45-year-olds increasing the percentage more than they did on the same day in 2018 and 2020. That's important because younger voters tend to prefer Democrats, and younger voters are the ones who will wind up winning this election for Democrats if it's to be won. So they have to show up. And they say that they're going to show up. They always show up late. And that's why nobody's coming to a conclusion about who won already, except Republicans who already think that they did.
Okay.
But they always do. So, it's hard to know what to make of
well,
that. There's no question the environment, though, is favoring Republicans, and there's no question later polls are favoring Republicans.
Stupid.
And their theory of the case has always been that undecideds, independents, and late deciders are going to break their way. And, that may be happening.
Yeah, late deciders are different from late voters, though.
Yes, late voters are election day voters.
Yes, all right. Although, I
late
like the way you
deciders
made
are those
it sound
who
like it's
decided
late.
in the last week.
It's the same deadline, but they make it sound like it's late, which is probably good for the younger voters. They like to be
well, if you're polling them and they
late.
say, I don't know, I'm undecided, and then a week before the election, I made up my mind, you're a late decider.
Yes, even if you're young, I guess.
Even if you're young.
All right, so NV stands for not vigorous.
Not
Nevada.
vigorous.
Okay.
The other thing to keep in mind, and I don't have any articles to cite on this, but I've seen this written elsewhere, which is an intriguing thought, and that is that whereas younger voters tend to be very Democratic compared to their seniors.
Okay.
In their vote, and that's why we like to see younger voters show up.
Yeah, come on out.
It's actually because younger voters are more diverse. That white younger voters aren't all that much more Democratic than their seniors.
I see.
But younger voters include a lot more non-white voters, and that's why it looks better for Democrats. Well, so in that sense, following Georgia's, how is the non-white vote going, may tell you as much or anything or more than which party they belong to.
I see. Okay.
So that's one theory of the case. We'll find out as we go along.
So the white demographic generally skew older. Is that the proper reverse reading of it then? Okay.
Yeah. So
right.
when you're looking at older voters, you're also looking at white voters.
Yeah.
Now, depending upon where you live, in Georgia, that may or may not be true.
Oh,
Just because Georgia has a lot of black voters.
old ones.
So
too,
they come
I
in
guess.
all sorts of shapes and sizes, old, young, So
Yeah, all right.
we'll see. Right now,
Great.
in Georgia, what's happening is that Georgia's following the usual patterns that they have for the past two elections. The black vote
those have been
is
okay.
about 29.4%, and the black registration's about 29%, and so they're right on their registration numbers. Political scientists in Georgia say you need a 29-29 or 30-30 vote for Democrats to win, 30% of the white vote, 30% show up for black voters. You have to wait and see at the end what that is. 29.4 is okay, but not blowing it out for Democrats. Suggests a very close vote. 29-29 might be enough. Female to male gender, 55 to 45. So females tend to vote more Democratic than their male counterparts.
All right.
The age group is starting to pick up just a little bit. It started out heavily older, and that's not as true anymore,
Okay.
but it's still true. And it will trend from this point onward until November 4th, which is the last day of early voting in Georgia. The voting crowd will get younger.
Okay, so it's Sunday before Election Day, not included in early voting. Early voting closes
November
before
4th is the
then.
last
Okay,
day.
so that's Friday. And that was the big issue for the big Souls to the Polls push, which I guess they moved a week earlier.
Yeah.
And, they knew how to deal with it. But I guess to the extent that anybody was waiting for the Sunday before Election Day, no. But if you're a regular churchgoer, they just put you on the bus last week instead. So good.
Right.
All right.
So the Souls to the Polls Sunday was as good as 2020, but not as good as 2018 for us.
All right. Well, now we'll wait and see how that counts up before the second.
The bottom line
next
is you
Sunday
can't
rolls
tell.
around.
Looks like a close race.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. The break reminder, as we were the break chatter, everybody go out and get your shots, because I was just noting that all the pediatric hospital beds in Virginia are full up now, and Greg tells me it's true everywhere. And you say you're setting up tents again?
Yeah, the Attili Lundgren Memorial Emergency Tent can be split into four. It's an enormous tent and can be split into four and sent to different locations around Connecticut, and it can house extra beds when needed. And there was talk of that activating for Connecticut Children's Hospital here, because we, like everybody else, seems to be in the middle of a tridemic, which is to say flu, RSV for the kids, and COVID.
All three.
And so they're all hitting at the same time, and that's not great. But, it's mostly RSV for the kids. It's been the problem. I'm sure you've seen the stories about that.
Yeah.
There is no vaccine, no specific treatment for RSV, just supportive treatment. It usually only lasts a couple of months. So you have to get through that. We've had winters where there's no beds for pediatrics in Connecticut before, and it's
That's why
bad.
I got tents. Yeah. All right. So it's not an unprecedented event. It's just an unfortunate one that also has some COVID in it.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's adding to it. And of course, part of the issue is that if you do your thing and you try to wear masks and, be good and not expose everybody to respiratory illnesses, you have really mild flu and RSV seasons.
Yes.
And then 2
last
years
time.
later, when you say, I'm sick and tired of wearing a mask, even though now is the time to do it again,
Yeah.
I'll just take it off and I'll get sick. And, maybe people haven't had these illnesses in a couple of years. And so the resistance to it is actually down a little bit.
Yeah.
Because the viruses, at least flu viruses, change and your body hasn't really had any thing to build up new immunity. And so,
No practice.
I get hit harder with it.
All right. Well, I'm
That's one
doing
thing.
my part to keep masking normal at least in the supermarket and the stores.
Ignore what people think you should do.
Yeah.
And, do what you think you should do.
Right.
I don't wear a mask if, I'm in my car. I do wear a mask
Oh,
if
no,
I go
yeah.
grocery shopping.
Yep.
I don't wear a
I'm
mask
doing
if I
that.
stop at Starbucks outside to pick something up, coffee beans or something like that. But I do if I go in the store, et cetera, et cetera. And, if I'm going to go to a gathering that has a lot of old people like me, then I test myself before I go because, it's stupid to just, I don't.
If you got
all
the
of our
tests
friends
lying
are,
around.
I hate to tell you, but you saw me 2 days ago, and now I have
Yeah.
COVID. And
Well, I'm getting a lot of that these days.
how did that happen? Well, I didn't feel good, and I figured it was just a cold. Okay.
Yeah, we
good.
are back
Thank you
to
so
that.
much.
And we were good for a while where everybody was like, I don't know, I'm sick or I don't feel good or whatever. So A, I'll test.
So I won't
or
go.
B, I won't go. Right. And although, it's been such a long time that I've certainly felt pressure where we were like, this is a really super important thing that we have going on. And someone doesn't feel 100%. And it's like, well, we can't just go. But then again, if we test it and they're positive, let's think about all the other things it's going to ruin for the next 5+ days. And it enters my mind, but then at the end I say, well, it's going to ruin them. But what else will ruin them? Giving everybody COVID. So we'll have to do it. Luckily, we got a lot of negatives. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a rough period. But I'm keeping the mask on mostly because I also don't want to have anything else. I just don't like sickness. It's no fun. So, all right. And then the compromise question. Do you wear a mask if you're going, you say when you go to the Starbucks, are you driving through? Is it a drive-up
If I drive
window?
through, I don't.
Okay.
If I go in the store, I do.
I wondered about that. And I thought for the brief encounter at the drive-in window, I'm fine. But sometimes if you do a dumb special order, like maybe I had to do for my kids, right? And
Well,
I'm
you have
sitting
to
at
sit
this
there.
window for 10 minutes here.
Yeah.
So, all right. I feel like there's a pipeline of virus blowing out that window at
You
me.
can roll it up while you wait.
That's something to do. All right. Well, anyway, that's neither here nor there. It's a drive-through item. Moving
Anyway,
on.
So that's the state of things. And no, we're not over it. And yes, there's still COVID. And so it's good to be careful.
Yep. Okay.
Back to
Good
polling.
reminder. Yeah.
Nate Cohn is a really wonky piece that's a subscriber email only, but it's really
That
interesting.
wonky. It's so wonky, even
So
some
wonky you
wonks
can't
don't
read it.
want it.
Will one small shift fix the polls in 2022? And the answer is no.
No.
Because whenever
I
you
said
see
yes. You
questions
said
like
no.
that in a headline, the answer is always no.
Oh. All right. How boring.
Wonkiness, he says, 8 out of 10.
Yeah, boy. All
So
right.
here's the deal. The great polling misfire of the 2020 election wasn't just about how Trump supporters were less likely to respond to political surveys. It was also about the failure of pollsters' usual statistical adjustments to fix it.
I see.
After
The
all,
special
some
sauce.
demographic groups always respond to surveys at lower rates than others. You adjust it, the secret sauce, and if you do it properly, you get the right answer.
Yes.
But
if you screw it
something
up,
that didn't
you know.
work in 2020 might work this time.
like the flu vaccine.
From year to year,
In a way.
sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And this little trick is simply, who did you vote for last time,
Oh. Okay.
right? So remember, what you're trying to do is adjust the sample to match reality.
All right.
So let's say Republicans who voted for Trump are less likely to answer polls.
All right.
They will answer, just not in the same volume as Democrats who voted for Biden, who are more eager to answer polls.
Okay.
So goes the theory of, the shy Trump voter.
Sure. They're so
Right.
shy. when they
So
shoot at you.
when you have your sample and you ask them, who did you vote for? And they say either Biden or Trump, then you adjust the sample so that you get the right answer. That Biden beat Trump, but, not by 20%.
All right.
So if you get the percentages right, your poll might be better.
Yeah.
That's the theory. Interesting theory. So he went back and looked at their 2020 polls and said, would that work? And he said, no, actually, we got worse results.
Oh.
But this year, maybe it would work. If we do that, the polls are ever so slightly more Republican by maybe 1 or 2 points. And maybe that's the reality. We'll see after the election. But that may help explain why the polls are not picking up what the Republicans say in terms of their voting and in terms of their internal polls and this, that, and everything else, which themselves could be wrong, is picking up their feeling like they're going to win. And everybody thinks they're going to win the House. The question is going to be by how many seats. And, of course, the big question on the table that nobody has the answer to is what happens in the Senate.
Okay.
In that regard, with that kind of environment, I'm looking at a write-up that Punchbowl did on good old Virginia 7, Abigail Spanberger, your favorite congressperson.
Yeah, well, I'm in the middle of the road about her.
Yeah. Well, you want her to win.
Sure.
But she really dislikes progressives and thinks they've screwed up the entire legislative agenda by complaining and asking for things they couldn't get.
Well, I just like
and
to
she's been very outspoken about that.
Yes, and also not outspoken because she does both sides.
Spanberger told us at an early
Reason.
voting site in Woodbridge, Virginia, that she wasn't concerned by Glenn Youngkin's popularity or his embrace of her opponent, Leslie Vega. Her re-election bid rests squarely on the legislative accomplishments of the 117th Congress, the American Rescue Plan, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, Inflation Reduction Act. And here's the question. Do you want to vote for somebody who has a track record of delivering?
I do.
Or not?
Okay.
GOP messaging, on the other hand, has tried to tie Spanberger to Pelosi, running an ad depicting the two in matching pantsuits, which is an interesting approach given the attack on Paul Pelosi and what's going on there.
Yeah, they weren't planning
and
for
given
that
the fact
yet.
that Spanberger's been one of Pelosi's opponents,
Yeah.
twice voting against her nomination for Speaker.
But
For
the
example.
pantsuit. But her pantsuits.
Right?
They both wear
Redistricting has
clothes.
shifted part of that to make it a little bit more Republican, so it's a true toss-up. And I see that in the process of doing this same reporter also ran into Glenn Youngkin at this Leslie Vega rally and asked him
What's your
about
problem, dude?
the comments he made about Nancy Pelosi, which were in pretty bad taste the day her husband was attacked, which is nobody likes violence, but we need to send Pelosi back to California, which, was really tone deaf.
Yeah.
And what he
Not
said is,
great.
quote, at the end of the day, I really wanted to express the fact that what happened to Speaker Pelosi's husband was atrocious and I didn't do a great job.
That is true.
That's about as much of an apology as you're ever going to get out of Youngkin.
Yeah, I think right. True. And it's an acknowledgement that it wasn't great, and that is probably all you'll get out of them.
Right. So, meanwhile,
I mean, I'll take it, I guess.
attack on Paul Pelosi becomes punchline for some Republicans.
Yeah.
More
Even
so
worse.
for Carrie Lake in Arizona.
Yeah, well, she's
Nancy
a mean
Pelosi,
girl.
well, she's got protection when she's in D.C. Apparently her house doesn't have a lot of protection.
I don't even see how that's a punchline. Like, it doesn't. You're right.
Right. And
So
then
what?
she lamented to Tucker
sorry.
Carlson that Carrie Lake, is the one being attacked over criticism she's received from mocking the Pelosis.
Yeah.
We can't talk about these issues because the media has told us they're prohibited.
But they're talking about them.
But I'm dangerous to people like Liz Cheney, who's out there campaigning against her. Latest polls show that one a tie, so I'm not sure how that one's going to go either.
Okay. Let's be
Other
there.
things that are in the news, of course, a lot of this about political violence. Kill feds, kill police. FBI nabs Boogaloo Boy with grenade launcher. I don't know if you heard about that one.
No, but I'm glad
I don't
to
know
hear it now.
if having a grenade launcher, where that falls in your gun fail series.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't fire it accidentally, so it won't make
Well, if
it
he shot his
list.
foot off with it, I suppose it would. But
Yes.
an anti-government
Well, it's not a
extremist in
gun.
Ohio built homemade machine guns, stockpiled silencers, and bomb-making materials, and acquired a rifle-mounted grenade launcher, which he later said he received in a trade along with some primo cocaine as part of a scheme to kill as many government officials as possible before police killed him.
All right. Well, police.
His name is Aaron McKillips, and was arrested Tuesday by members of a task force from the FBI's Cleveland division, well-known member of the Boogaloo Boys, a loosely affiliated militia group seeking to overthrow the government by touching off a second civil war. So there's
And
that.
touching
The fellow
fentanyl.
who hit Paul Pelosi with a hammer supposedly had a list of other people he wanted to get. So it wasn't just Nancy Pelosi, it was other people as well.
And lots of Republicans on the list? Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah.
The New York Times has a piece today. Inflammatory radio ads from two Trump-aligned groups are airing in battleground states. The ad campaigns, totaling over $6.5 million, talk about anti-white bigotry and transgender care for children. They're led by Stephen Miller. They're on talk radio aimed at blacks and Hispanics.
They love to listen to Stephen Miller.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, they
imagine
think
use
it worked
somebody else's voice.
in Miami and other places in Florida and South Texas. So they're trying to take it national, I guess.
Give it a shot. I mean, don't give it a shot, but they figured that they would.
Right. Other
I
court
say they
things
shouldn't.
you may know or may not know that whereas there was a Trump judge who said, people have First Amendment rights and I can't just give an injunction against overall showing up to watch
Oh, yes.
drop boxes.
Dropbox watchers in Arizona, right?
But a second suit brought by the League for Women Voters, which was much more specifically tailored in terms of what remedies they were asking for,
Yeah.
in fact, got the courts to say, oh, yeah, you know what? This one is a much better suit than the other one. Yeah, we'll issue the injunction.
See what you mean? Okay. Yeah, I wonder what the specifics were. Maybe I'll find that. And,
So I
take a
have
look.
that.
Oh, well, then maybe I'll read
the
that
New York
then.
Times
I'll
here
read
has
it.
a piece.
I know.
Judge
how.
curbs actions of election monitoring group in Arizona. The group may not take photos or videos of voters, may not openly carry firearms near ballot boxes, may not post information
Okay.
about voters online.
Helpful.
And in addition to that,
Some
they
other stuff.
prohibit the group, Clean Elections USA, and other persons in active concert or participation with from disseminating information about voters online and from making false statements about Arizona's statutes. Specifically, they're required online to say that if anybody sees somebody dropping off more than one ballot at a drop box,
Yes.
that may be legal in Arizona because family members are allowed to drop off yours and your family member's ballot.
Right. That's the
And they're
big
required
problem.
to say that on their websites.
Okay. That's helpful because that apparently, as we read, the debunking of the stupid D'Souza movie, 2000 Mules, that was a big issue. And the whole thing is supposition that they kept assuming that, first of all, that people had multiple ballots. And then, on top of that, even though they couldn't prove that they even had a second ballot, they said if they do have second ballots, they're totally illegal because you can only drop off one at a time. And that's just not true.
Right. Now, Rick Hasen, you may be aware of. You may
Yes.
know that name. He's an election law lawyer and very good. And on his election law blog, he had a guest post by a fellow named Derek Muller on October 31st, who interestingly wrote this: divergent strategies may yield divergent outcomes in Arizona Dropbox voter intimidation cases.
That is okay. That's a weird headline. All right.
Right.
What does it mean?
The first case, with lead plaintiff Arizona Alliance for Retired Americans and brought by lead attorneys from the Elias Law Group, Mark Elias, sought the fairly broad remedy from the restraining order. The court should enter a temporary restraining order, a TRO, an injunction prohibiting defendants from gathering within sight of drop boxes, from following, taking photos of, otherwise recording voters. Mm-hmm. And that broad relief, like don't even show up anywhere near the drop boxes, the judge couldn't go for that.
Right. Okay.
But that's not the only voter intimidation case pending in Arizona, he wrote before the second case that we were just describing. There's another is on a more sustainable foundation for success. In that case, with League of Women Voters of Arizona, saying that the League was not seeking a blanket injunction to halt anything that might loosely be labeled poll monitoring,
Right. They were more targeted.
as the other case did, but
Okay.
specific components of defendants' operation, which include time-tested and highly effective methods of voter intimidation, including spreading specific false information, threatening and harassing monitoring, false public accusations of voter fraud, disclosure of personal information, or doxing. So those specific things are what they went after, and that's what the judge said, yeah, that's reasonable.
Okay, good. So a little bit of
So
extra
I thought that
thought
was
went a long
interesting.
way.
So, how you prepare your case matters. You can't
That's
just say,
right.
this is terrible. You can't allow them to do anything, and the judge will say, well, they have First Amendment rights. You have to allow them to do something.
Right.
So I'm not giving you your injunction. And the other one was, well, I want these specific things to not be done. And the judge says, okay, that's reasonable. You can have them.
Yeah, all right. That's a good lesson in general. And the things that they ask for seem, the things they needed protection from are pretty outrageous as it is. There's no First Amendment right to tell everybody,
right.
You know,
and by the way, if you
these
step back
people
and
are.
think about it, right, the law is not a direct analogy to politics. There's
All
no
right.
Overton window. You don't win by saying, I'm asking for everything and I hope the judge gives me something.
Yes.
It's more like,
Generally
I need to spell out
speaking.
exactly what, where, why, and how. You give me those things and I'll make a good case for it. And I'm not going to exaggerate. And I'm not going to go over the top. And I'm not going to ask for everything because I'll lose.
Yes. Well, that is generally the case. And that's the way you should approach it because most often you'll lose your case or get thrown out that way. Unless, of course, you're in front of Judge Cannon in
Right.
Florida, in which case
No,
she'll
I
fix
get all
it
that.
for
I just
you.
think it's interesting because often we have these arguments about why are they doing it? Well, you have to move the Overton window. Well, the Overton window is a thing in your mind that always works. And you know what? It doesn't always work. Sometimes it's simply not appropriate.
There are places where there's a set of rules and they're applied and one person gets to decide whether or not they apply or not. And that's a bad atmosphere for mass tools like Overton windows. If you're just focusing on one person who has the strength of the law behind them and can say no to it, that, you know, you have less shot at it. You need a bigger target.
You know, but it's also personality in your approach to politics. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask for everything as part of the negotiation. Maybe I'll get something.
Oh, I see.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Or
Well, it does
you can
depend
be
who you're
Abigail
negotiating
Sandberg
with.
and say, I just want these things and give me these things and forget about your other nonsense. We know that's not happening.
Yeah. I mean, that
Or
could
you can be in the middle like Ted Kennedy, you know.
Oh,
Say,
yeah.
well, you know, take half a loaf and then come back for the other half tomorrow.
All right. Yeah, I guess read the room, know your audience, know the
all that
size
stuff.
of your audience, all these things. Good practical advice. All right. Well, good. That way, I did see something this morning about the way it was framed when I saw it this morning was that the DOJ had intervened in some fashion, but I guess they joined with the League of Women Voters in their suit. And I guess the League of Women Voters had targeted this thing more sharply. And that's
Right.
why they went back in their own suit rather than joining the first couple plaintiffs.
But wait, there's more.
Oh, all right.
So in addition to the Boogaloo Boys and the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers
These
and
boys.
you know everything else, there's a group you may remember called True the Vote.
Yes. Yeah, we discussed them extensively. Yeah. Yesterday.
Right? So the group that provided the bogus data for 2,000 mules is True the Vote. Remember that name. We're going to be hearing a lot about them in the coming months. Two
We are.
prominent True the Vote figures are put in jail this week.
Right.
You
Put
covered
that
that,
away.
right?
I haven't covered the fact that they're in jail. No, that's new for me. We were covering their activities in 2,000 Mules and in Nevada and
Well,
et cetera.
guess what? They went to jail for it.
Well, yay. We'll figure out. Although I started to read
Leaders
the thing.
of right-wing election conspiracy group jailed
It's
after
odd.
being found in contempt of court.
Yes. So they're in jail not specifically for the things that they did. They're in
Judge
jail
told
for
them to
not
stop doing it, and you have to do other things. And they said, "No, we're not going to do anything."
not complying with the order from the court. So they haven't ruled specifically on, it's now illegal to make crazy movies full of lies. That's not what we've got
Right.
yet.
The election logistics software company that sued them for defamation, libel, and slander
Yes.
said that the court order in part required True the Vote's leaders to hand over allegedly hacked documents, identify the people involved in the alleged hack, and confidentially tell the plaintiffs there how they hacked their system.
Yes.
And they were jailed after they failed to comply with doing any of those things.
Right. So it's not even necessarily the case that it was illegal to do the hacking. It is. They'll get to that later. But for the moment, all it is they're in trouble for not handing over evidence that the court says you have to give up.
Where, it's like...
It's jail.
Oh,
That's
you want
fine.
to sue me? Great. It's discovery. What does that mean to a non-lawyer? It means to a non-lawyer that you're going to have to tell us a little bit about what's going on under oath, and it has to be factual.
Right. And you
So
say...
they failed discovery, I guess.
Yeah, well, if you are ordered in discovery to give something up, like you could you could push back and say, no, discovery doesn't mean that because I'm just not going to give you the stuff. That's when the judge says, well, then I am just going to put you in jail until you do.
Well, that's not really being in jail because I say I'm not here.
Yeah, well, all right, just
okay,
eat
well, you can
this.
say it from this cell.
And wear this and sleep on this cot.
Right. Exactly.
You're not in jail.
If you want to
Sure,
insist you're not in
go
jail,
for it.
you go right ahead and do that.
Yeah. Well, that is another interesting reminder of the differences between civil and criminal contempt of court and or contempt of Congress, which works the same way. Steve Bannon, sentenced to 4 months, hasn't started yet, but it's a term of months because it's criminal contempt of court. You were just a rotten person and we're going to convict you of the crime of contempt. These folks are being held in, I think, in civil contempt because they haven't complied with a court order and the court can hold you there until you do. So if they say, I'd rather die than give that up, all right, we'll wait. That's the answer. So, okay, that's interesting too. Why we weren't locking Steve Bannon up until he died, I don't know, but we went the other direction on that one. There's a reason.
Finally, really interesting piece today by Jim Rutenberg in the New York Times.
All right.
The untold story of Russiagate and the road to war in Ukraine and how they're really the same story.
Okay. Yes. Why not?
To abbreviate this, if the whole thing is too long and you didn't read it.
You abbreviate pundits all the time.
Right. So you may remember that Paul Manafort had information on polling, which was confidential, and he shared it with Konstantin Klimnik, an associate of his who also happens to be a old-fashioned modern equivalent of a KGB agent.
Yes.
Right?
I do.
And so part of the whole Russiagate thing that Trump says was phony and a hoax because the Steele, the whole thing that Paul Manafort got convicted about is a part and parcel of this meeting with Klimnik and sharing this data. And they actually, there was a Russiagate to investigate. How did that happen and why? And it turns out, according to Rutenberg's story, that when they met, Klimnik and Manafort, to exchange this polling data, it was part and parcel of a bigger plot.
That plot being?
That plot being what you might call loosely the Mariupol plan.
The
Mariupol plan.
Okay.
After the strategically vital port city, it called for the creation of an autonomous republic in Ukraine's east, giving Putin effective control of the country's industrial heartland, where Kremlin armed, funded, and directed separatists were waging a 2-year-old shadow war.
Yes, this was
In this plan, you set up this Donetsk and Luhansk, and you make it a new republic,
right? And
you put Yanukovych in charge.
Oh, that guy, the guy who
and
was,
the trade-off is peace with Ukraine for a broken and subservient Ukraine.
All right.
The scheme cut against decades of American policy, and a President Clinton would no doubt maintain or perhaps even harden that stance and take Ukraine's side in any war. He didn't say that, but I just said that.
Oh, okay.
And Trump was already suggesting he'd upend the diplomatic status quo. If elected, Klimnik believed Trump could help make the Mariupol plan a reality.
Right. This would have had to do with those secret peace plans delivered in envelopes by, let's see, Rand Paul, I think, had one. Carter Page might have had another copy of it. Somebody else had a third copy of it. These things were being supposed to be delivered to Trump, and he was supposed to put the backing of the U.S. behind it.
Right. So
but instead,
Putin's assault on Ukraine and his attack on American democracy have until now been treated largely as two distinct storylines, but they all come together in this meeting, says Rutenberg, and it's all part and parcel of the same big story. Russia's election meddling so that Russia could be in a stronger position to take over Ukraine, essentially.
Yeah. I think that has presented itself before, too. And I guess if it's not discussed in this article, we can also add. So despite the fact that part never went through and Trump never outright endorsed and put the United States behind this Mariupol peace plan, as they call it, So tensions still rose, and Russia still interested in tearing away at least the eastern provinces. And so the rest of the world saying, well, what we need to do is bolster Ukraine's ability to defend itself. And Trump says, yeah, but let me tell you that first, if you want the weapons and the money to defend yourself, I need you to do me a favor. And then we dive straight into the Zelensky phone call and the first impeachment as well. All related. True. Very good.
So he says the second draft of history emerges from a review he did of the hundreds of pages of documents produced by investigators for the special counsel, Robert Mueller, for a Republican-led Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and the impeachment hearing transcripts and the recent crop of Russiagate memoirs from interviews with 50 people in the U.S. and Ukraine, including 4-hour-long conversations with Manafort himself.
Who's pardoned, so he doesn't mind telling
Right.
you.
For Trump, the Russia investigation was the original sin, the first of many politically motivated witch hunts. But to view the record left behind through the blood-filtered lens of Putin's war, now in its 9th month, is to discover a trail of underappreciated signals telegraphing the depth of his Ukrainian obsession and the life-or-death stakes that America's domestic travails would have for some 45 million people nearly 5,000 miles away.
Okay.
So
Well,
it's all part and parcel of the same thing. So when people tell you, oh, the whole Russiagate thing was a hoax, well, the Ukraine war is not a hoax, and it's all part of the same story.
No, and you ought to keep in mind, especially if Republicans do grab control of the House of Representatives, that their new likely leader, Kevin McCarthy, warned about that whole situation, including up to and including every bit of the looming Ukraine hostilities in 2016, nonetheless said, this is a good time for me to tell a joke, a quote-unquote joke about Putin paying Trump, which I actually believe, but I'm about to ignore for the rest of my career. He's a real jerk and an idiot, and he missed, like, the biggest foreign policy development in the world presented to him on a silver platter by the then Prime Minister of Ukraine, and still missed it. He's a very dumb guy. All right. Thanks, Greg.
Anyway, that's the story, and we're done. And I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right. That, too, is a story we'll stick to. I appreciate it. Well done, all you quiet dogs as well. And, all right, we'll catch up tomorrow. Thank you for setting things up for us today. And, I will want to read a little bit more about maybe the specifics of the folks that find themselves in jail through their activity with True the Vote. So I appreciate that as well. And we'll catch up with you then tomorrow. Thanks again. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, where to go next? I don't know. Let's we'll dive back into Pocket, but also some of these stories that Greg had for us at the end. Maybe require a fuller reading, but let's see. There's what have we put aside here for? You know what? First of all, I guess I'll point out, since we were talking about rainbow fentanyl being false, but gun violence and random stupidity being very real. I don't know. Hit all of a sudden yesterday with two extraordinarily dumb gun fail stories, both of which, of course, because the dumbest ones do involve children, but more unusual and more dumb than the ordinary run-of-the-mill 40 times a day gun fail, where kids find their parents' guns that the parents have frequently purchased to protect the family, but leave lying around loaded, and kids find them and shoot themselves. Different story. They didn't even wait for that. This is the story of adults being in possession of the guns, but saying, let's do dumb things with the guns, or sometimes including giving them to the children, sometimes including just straight up shooting the children yourselves in particularly dumb, crazy, and alarming ways. Let's see. First, where's this one from? Muncie, Indiana. Court documents tell us about a 4-year-old shot accidentally in Muncie after this, the subject of the article here in his booking photograph, a white bearded guy wearing, by the way, a Boys in the Hood t-shirt, which is a dated reference to be sure. But at any rate, so he's up to speed, on modern life, I guess. He's really paying attention to things. 4-year-old shot after Muncie man let young children handle guns and at some point pointed a loaded gun at this young girl, 4-year-old girl who got shot. And you just, another one of those instances in which you wonder what the hell is going on in your head. Court documents reveal that a Muncie man reportedly pointed a loaded handgun at a 4-year-old girl in order to show her how not to hold the weapon when he inadvertently shot the child. Here's the, hey, little girl, here's what you want to do. Here's a way not to hold the gun. If you were to hold the gun, you wouldn't want to point it at yourself. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm not pointing it at myself to show you that. I'm pointing it at you. You are yourself. What you don't want in life, 4-year-old, and it's not too early for you to learn this, and also I'm apparently not your parent, but, it takes a village, as they say. So I will teach you. You don't want guns pointing at you, and if they are pointing at you, you definitely don't want them loaded, and you sure as hell don't want to pull the trigger like this. Kapow. Where's this guy's brain? Don't know. But they're allowed to carry guns and walk around and vote, by the way. And no chance, I don't think, that he'll be convicted and lose his right to vote before Election Day. So just be on the lookout for a crazy idiot in a Boys in the Hood t-shirt. He may still be in jail on Election Day, but someone will rush him a ballot, no doubt. The Muncie Police Department said the girl had to be transported to Riley Hospital due to her injury. Really? What a surprise. But ended up being treated and released. So that's the local speak for expected to make a full recovery with a hole in her, but treated and released. Let's see. Jeffrey Burnham, in case you want to make the guy famous, 35 years old, so, a mere child himself, arrested Saturday morning, charged with neglect of a dependent, resulting in serious injury. That sounds like a bit of a euphemism for the crime of, shooting a 4-year-old girl. But okay, it is a level 3 felony, and, of course, charged with criminal recklessness, which is a level 5 felony. I don't know whether the felonies get worse or they go up or down in number. But we can ask any of the boys in Indiana can tell us about that one. According to court documents, Burnham admitted to police that before the shooting, he allowed both the 4-year-old girl and another child under the age of 6 to, quote, manipulate the firearm. That sounds like maybe the police handing him the word manipulate. I'm not certain that he came up with it on his own. Burnham told officers he thought the gun was unloaded. Now, there's a way of checking, and it's called checking, but I don't think anybody taught Mr. Super Gun Guy, who's now out here instructing kids under 6 years old in proper gun procedure, how to handle the thing. I don't know how to look at it. I think the only way to find out whether it's loaded or not is to pull the trigger and see what comes out. If it's a bang flag, it's not loaded. If it's a bullet, from a handheld instant death machine that punctures a hole in anything it touches, and you touch it to your heart, then it was loaded. Burnham reportedly told investigators he was holding the gun sideways, pointing it at the 4-year-old girl. Why holding it sideways, and what does that even mean? And is that holding it sideways? Was she standing to his side and he was holding it sideways, and it was in that sense pointing at her, and he's like displaying the gun in his hands? Or do they mean he's rotated it on its axis and is holding the gun sideways like cool gangsters do in the films, with the muzzle still pointing outward, towards the target, but the butt and handle of the pistol, parallel to the ground. You know what I mean? Anyway, doesn't really say. Burnham reportedly told investigators holding the gun sideways, pointing it at the 4-year-old when the gun, quote, went off, i.e. he pulled the trigger, and struck her in the lower extremities. You could say where that means, but maybe it's difficult to explain. Foot, leg, you could just say it. Lower extremities, low abdomen, high thigh, where exactly? Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, Burnham said he'd been explaining how holding a gun sideways was the incorrect way to hold a firearm. And I now it's starting to sound like, well, kids, I just got to tell you because I'm such a cool gun guy. And 4-year-olds totally need to know this. Sometimes you'll see movies like Boys in the Hood, for instance, where people hold the gun sideways and pull the trigger and, fire it. And that's the incorrect way. You really want to hold it this way and with two hands and brace yourself for kickback. He knows all of that about guns. He knows the incorrect way of holding them. One of which is to point them at 4-year-olds, whether or not they're loaded. And then, of course, one of the biggest incorrect things you can do with holding a gun that you don't intend to fire is putting your finger on the trigger and pulling it. You don't want that. Now, but I'm just thinking it could be this dumb. If I'm holding the gun sideways and this is not the way you want to do it because kickback, et cetera, what's your finger even doing on the trigger? It's just too much concentrated dumb to talk about. Anyway, Burnham maintained that he didn't mean to injure the girl and he thought the handgun wasn't loaded. Police said the shooting occurred Saturday morning in if you want to know, the 400 block of North State Street in Muncie. Stay away from that block. There's a lot of dumb people around there. Although one fewer of them. Now he's presumably in jail somewhere in Muncie. But it doesn't say whether he's been released or not. Or at least it didn't register with me. No, it's the child who will be released from the hospital. Okay, so, pretty dumb, right? Hard to top, right? Well, guns are involved. Dumb people with guns. They're going to do dumb things. This one is from Texas, San Antonio. And the headline kind of says it all here, too. Woman arrested after shooting baby in the chest while playing with a gun, police say. The baby wasn't playing with the gun. The woman was. But, geez. Come on, people. A woman arrested after recklessly handling a gun at a Halloween party. For the children, of course, and shooting an 18-month-old baby, police say. Guys, cut it out. Eloisa Fraga, F-R-A-G-A, 33 years old, it's the 30-somethings that are doing all this, was charged, and by the way, I was kidding, but that does mean something. Whenever we talk about sort of reckless, idiotic gun violence, I think we always, we're always told anyway, it's the 20-somethings that are the real danger and all this. They're now old enough to buy a gun, but they're too young to know what the hell they're doing. And here's the 30-somethings with all of this. I guess it just never goes away. So Eloisa Fraga, 33, charged, or maybe Fraga, I don't know how she pronounces that, F-R-A-G-A, charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Yeah. Police said the parents brought the unconscious child to the hospital late Sunday, saying the cell phone the child was holding exploded. Why is your child bleeding from a gaping wound in the chest? Well, the child was holding a cell phone and the cell phone exploded. And it did. That's true. You'll find out later in the story, but I think you're already guessing now. Well, but you said that the child was shot in the chest. Well, that's true too. And how could the two things be both true? You could shoot straight through the cell phone, which would then explode. But you also, get shot in the chest with a bullet, and presumably also the cell phone explodes. But this is really amazing. So imagine you bring your child to a Halloween party, and imagine, it's hard to imagine. I'm sure this audience, try to imagine bringing your child to a Halloween party where 30-somethings are waving pistols around and doing things like pointing them at your 18-year-old baby's chest and staying at the party. But try to imagine that person then shoots your baby in the chest and you go to the hospital, of course, to try and help with the baby's gunshot wound. And I guess on the way, you have to say, Eloisa's a pretty good friend. We got to come up with a story to tell the doctors so that they adequately treat our baby, because we don't want our baby to die from a gunshot wound or anything else in the chest. But we also don't want Eloisa to be in trouble here. Whereas, I think you'd be justified in saying, Eloisa, to this point, has been a relatively good friend, and I feel bad about what's about to happen, but she did just shoot our baby. And really, the most important thing right now is that the child get adequate care. We need to tell the doctors what's going on here, that they need to be looking for a bullet wound in our baby's chest, not superficial skin burns from an exploding cell phone. And although I feel bad about what might happen to Eloisa, that's really something she's going to have to deal with. She's 33. She's a big girl. She's going to have to accept the consequences of shooting a baby in the chest. The baby is innocent. We need to tell the doctors what happened here. But instead, they didn't. And you know what Greg would say about that?
That's bullshit.
It's correct. It really is a terrible, terrible thing to do. Police said the parents brought the unconscious child to the hospital late Sunday, saying a cell phone the child was holding had exploded. Medical personnel called the police after they determined that the telephone was illegal. No, after they determined that the story didn't match what they observed, according to the arrest report. Now, that is a mild way of saying it. I'm always fascinated in how these things get written up and whether or not, pro-gun sentiment in the state where they're working, these reporters, or what, or just trying to be careful in legal terms, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, think about that, right? The medical personnel called police after they determined that the story didn't match what they observed, which was a bullet hole in the chest of an 18-month-old baby. That's what they observed. But they were told that its cell phone had exploded. And, but they called police when they noticed, oh my God, the parents are full of it. They're telling us a story. My first reaction at that point would have been one of these two parents shot the baby, because why would you lie for Eloisa? I could, as bad as it is, I could see people lying for themselves or their spouse, but I don't know. Anyway, investigators found out that the parents and the child were at a Halloween party in a relative's home. Maybe Eloisa is related. I don't know. The child was in a stroller holding the cell phone, which has nothing to do with it, but holding the cell phone when a witness said they heard what sounded like a balloon popping. Okay, I think we now all know what that is. At that time, the parents realized that their child had been shot in the chest. That would be because the gun was fired at your child. According to the arrest report, the bullet hit the cell phone that the child was holding and then hit him in the chest. That's a child shot in the chest, not a child suffering from an exploding cell phone injury. During the investigation, witnesses told officers that they saw Frega. Oh, it's Frega, F-R-E-G-A in this second spelling of it. Fraga in the first spelling, F-R-A-G-A up top, F-R-E-G-A, which I think is probably the more correct, is used the second time. That they saw Frega playing recklessly with a pistol when it went off, hitting the child, just by accident, I guess. The witness identified Frega from a photo. That's the person I saw shoot an 18-month-old baby in the chest at a Halloween party. Yes. Frega, by the way, no mention of what the costumes were. Interestingly enough, maybe the cell phone was part of a costume. Child was dressed up as Boss Baby. Frega was released, by the way, on Monday on $75,000 bond. She is expected back in court on December 14th, but who knows what story they may tell. I hate cell phones, and I just was against giving the child a cell phone, and I thought I could pick the cell phone clean out of his hand without actually hitting him, but he turned at the last minute. I don't know what they were doing trying to protect this person, but we'll never find out because they almost never follow up on stories like that, or at least not in any prominent national way. So maybe reported in the San Antonio papers during this woman's trial. We'll see. Anyway, no shortage of dumb gun fail stories out there. That's still happening. Let's add this to the picture. As we discuss stories of political violence increasing around the country, I think in the wake of the Pelosi attack, which, by the way, yes, new information, before we jump into that, new information out there about the details of the attack, let's see, which come to us from, the Washington Post summed them all up, but I guess before all this information came out, the right-wing rumor mongers and outright election denialists and liars, etc., evil people, terrible people, spreading all sorts of rumors about things. Let's say first there was, of course, the rumor about the relationship that they said existed between Pelosi and the attacker, which doesn't appear to be true and never really felt like it was true, but this was the sort of thing they wanted to lie about. But apparently Trump has been whispering to people behind closed doors somewhere, according to some other story, that he was hearing that the whole thing was a setup. And did you know that the window was actually broken from the inside? I don't know what they thought, but I guess he thought that they had to fake the break-in, so they broke the window from the inside. Anyway, apparently, Capitol Police monitor the security cameras around the Pelosi home remotely, and I don't know whether there's a Capitol police officer that is sometimes posted at the home. She, Nancy Pelosi herself, as Speaker of the House, has a 24-hour security detail, which means I'm sure that when she is at home in San Francisco, there is a Capitol Police officer there. Whether there's a Capitol Police officer at the home when she's not there, I'm not certain, but it made it sound from this Washington Post article like there often is a Capitol Police officer on assignment there nearby, because Paul Pelosi was asking for that officer or whoever was on duty to be brought to the House. But that's a more involved version of the story than I need to tell at the moment. But anyway, the point here was that the Capitol Police have videotape of the security cameras at the Pelosi home, and they did, in fact, capture the break-in. So the story that Donald Trump supposedly is circulating, that they broke the window from the inside to make it look like a break-in, not true, because there's actual videotape of the suspect, whose name is what? David DePape? Is that, how are they pronouncing it? It's D-E-P-A-P-E, Pape, but I was like, D-E, not D-U, like Dupop, like Chateauneuf Dupop. But no, that's what they should call him. That's his nickname, David Chateauneuf Dupap, I guess. Anyway, showing him breaking the window from the outside, which is how you would break into a home, just like everybody would ordinarily expect, except for the lies of Donald Trump and the like. But lots of other things, too. It's an important story. It's important, of course, that the Capitol Police were monitoring the situation remotely, but nobody saw it. They only saw later when they walked by the screen and they saw flashing police lights in the camera. Hey, what happened? Let's rewind the tape. And sure enough, saw the break-in. I don't know if there's supposed to be someone watching those monitors at all times or what, but that was of no help. But they did DVR the incident only to watch it later, but then they saw a spoiler was what really happened. There's some police activity here. Spoiler alert. Let's go back and watch the show now. Anyway, so all of the dumb rumors are pretty much debunked by both recordings of the 911 call that Paul Pelosi made and the videotape from the Capitol Police. Meanwhile, other things are happening. Here's something that might have gone under the radar for many of us from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, under the radar because it happened with a lower-ranking, not even an elected official, but someone contending for a Pennsylvania State House of Representatives seat, a candidate for Fayette, Pennsylvania House seat, assaulted amid warnings about election-related threats and violence. What do you know? Again, from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and reported yesterday, a candidate running for a state house seat called 911 Monday morning after being assaulted at his Fayette County home in what would be the third time in 2 weeks that he has had to call police to his residence. Democrat Richard Ringer said he was bloodied and knocked unconscious by an attacker in his backyard around 5 a.m. A guy was standing with his back to me. I went and bear hugged him, wrestled, ended up on the ground, said Mr. Ringer, 69, who is running in a contested race for the open 51st House District against Republican Charity Grimm Krupa. Wow, that is a weird name. I mean, it's nothing particularly weird about it. It's just a weird combination. Charity, normal enough English language name. Grimm is always weird, but it's a real surname. And Krupa, okay, No relation to Gene, as far as I know. He was larger than I am, and he pinned me down on my left side. I mean, it doesn't sound like it was a tremendously smart idea to say the way to deal with this intruder is to go bear hug them and wrestle them, but you're caught up in the heat of the moment, defending your home, I guess. Interesting that he didn't go immediately to the gun. There are various reasons for that. I don't know what they are. Maybe they didn't have one. Maybe he just decided he would solve it this way, and that would be better. He was larger than I am, and he pinned me down on my left side. He hit me 10 to 12 times in the head, in the face, and by the eye, and he knocked me out. A call placed to the state police trooper who responded to a call to Mr. Ringer's home, that is a call placed by the reporters, was not returned Monday afternoon. Mr. Ringer said his hands were bloodied and his face bruised from the attack. Mr. Ringer said he couldn't provide police with much of a description of the man. Ringer also has had 2 incidents of vandalism to his home that have occurred within the past 2 weeks. One, a threatening, apparently election-related message spray painted on his garage door, and the other, a brick thrown through a storm door window. The spray-painted message was partially washed off by the rain by the time Mr. Ringer saw it, but what was left, clearly visible, were the words, "Your race" and "dead." Taken together, Mr. Ringer said he can't help but be suspicious that the 3 incidents within 3 weeks of the general election are related to his candidacy, especially considering how calm and quiet a neighborhood it is. In other words, the crime isn't usually rampant in it. The incidents in Mr. Ringer's Uniontown area neighborhood come as election officials around Pennsylvania and elsewhere brace for potential harassment and violence on Election Day. Acting Secretary of State, yes, we're still using that. Acting Secretary of State Lee Chapman acknowledged Monday at the Pennsylvania Press Club luncheon in Harrisburg that there has been an increase in election-related threats since the 2020 election. In a call with reporters last week, she said her office has received threats in recent weeks. So there you go. So she's got firsthand knowledge of these increases in threats. So poor Mr. Ringer here has been attacked. I assume Republicans by now are saying that the whole thing was staged and fake. And quite honestly, if it had been a Republican, we might have thought the same thing, especially when it came to the spray painting on the garage. That does sound rather familiar. But then, of course, it got followed up by the brick through the window and then an actual physical assault. So if it's a hoax, he's going all in on it and beating himself up in order to make the point. I'm starting to think it might actually be real here. Anyway, just thought I would make you aware of that. Let's see, and other news out there as well. This maybe we'll stick with stuff from the States. I picked up this Twitter thread yesterday from David Pepper, a blue checkmark kind of guy. He's going to have to pay $8 a month starting soon when what's his name, Elmo, who owns Twitter, starts charging people money in a blatant misunderstanding of the whole purpose of the blue check mark. But and that is interesting all in its own right, by the way, that story. I'm not certain how much of it is willful dumbness and how much of it is just genuine dumbness. But yeah, he's decided that one of the ways he can make money off of Twitter, and there really just may be no way to make money off of Twitter, and which is why banks should never have financed a $44 billion buyout of Twitter, but they went ahead and did so, and now they're going to all lose money. But more to the point, Elon Musk, that's the guy's name, doesn't want to lose money, so he wants to charge people. He said $20, then people said that's crazy, then he said how about 10, okay, how about 8? But the whole thing is a misunderstanding of the purpose of the blue check mark. But it does reflect a sort of Republican way of thinking about things. Blue check marks in the eyes of Republicans on Twitter are a reward for elite status in some way, that only elites, and usually Eastern Democratic liberal elites, get them, even though, many of the same people complaining about that being the case actually have check marks of their own. And so if you believe that it's a status thing, then you believe that people would pay $8 a month, or should be asked to pay money at any level to maintain the check mark. Whereas the rest of us kind of remember, the blue check mark thing was supposed to be that you were a person of some importance at some level, representing either your own brand or representing some other brand of factual reporters. So a lot of journalists get the blue check marks, and people who are influencers of some kind, whether in the traditional sense or in the newfangled sense, would get the blue check marks. And it's not something that they paid for or sought for status per se, but as a way of verifying that Twitter has done some minimal amount of investigation and has verified that I am who I say I am. I'm not a person impersonating someone else in the hopes that you will take my word for whatever it is I want to tell you about because you think I'm a reporter for the New York Times, and I would therefore not lie to you outright, even though, that's starting to be questionable as well. Anyway, so now you can, for $8 a month, buy the check mark that says you are who you say you are, or at least that's how Democrats understood it. Republicans, of course, it's a transaction. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Ready for the sprint to the end today? So, all of that blue check mark diversion was meant to bring us around to the fact that a blue check marked fellow by the name of David Pepper, who you may have seen on or around Twitter, doesn't really describe himself in the Twitter bio, but he's been a prominent figure on Twitter for a little while. I'll go over to davidpepper.com in order to get something in the way of a bio for you. A lawyer, writer, political activist, former elected official, and adjunct professor, served as chair of the Ohio Democratic Party between 2015 and 2021. So that'll give you a sense of where he's coming from and the source of his knowledge of Ohio politics. And he has this to say: Ohio's Pelican Brief, a thread. And this one is presented. Stick with this. It will stun you. He's a bit of a sensationalist and a promoter, which is fine. It's exactly what you need to be doing on a forum like Twitter. And you can't be afraid of doing it if you want to be Ohio State Democratic Chair, or an elected official for that matter. Remember the book/movie, The Pelican Brief? I remember that it existed and that they did make a movie out of it. And I don't think I saw the movie. Definitely didn't read the book. But so it doesn't exactly make sense to me. But for those of you for whom those of you who have seen it or read it, or both, it will make instant sense to you. But remember the book and movie, The Pelican Brief, where one case explained an entire plot involving the makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court? Sounds dangerous and realistic, too. Well, that's happening right now in Ohio, but the victims are not pelicans. It's much worse. I assume that would make more sense if I was familiar with the movie. But to open your eyes to this case, please watch the ad below, which began running digitally today in Ohio. This, a thread from yesterday, of course. Sounds crazy, right? Justices who claim to be law and order trying to stop a child rape victim's case from being heard at Ohio's highest court. It does sound crazy, and we, let's see, how long is the ad? It's 30 seconds, so it might actually be running somewhere. but essentially making the case, making the case that justices for the Ohio Supreme Court, for whom voters in Ohio actually do cast ballots, that they should be defeated in the upcoming election or at the next opportunity and thrown off of the court because of this terrible thing that they were doing that had the end result of trying to stop a child rape victim's case from being heard at the Ohio Supreme Court, siding instead with the pedophile in the case as opposed to the victim. Sounds crazy, right? But it's true, says David. Here's one receipt. The 3 GOP justices, all dissenting in hearing an appeal from a victim of rape and sexual assault. The victim is named here. I don't know if it makes sense to bring out the name. I guess maybe they're now adult, and that's why naming makes sense. We'll see whether it becomes important later on. They sided with the pedophile in the case, who is a gentleman by the name of He's no gentleman, that's for sure. Pompa. The case is, well, now this would, of course, reveal the plaintiff, but it's a matter of public record. Brandt, B-R-A-N-D-T, Brandt versus Pompa. The victim, Brandt, suing the attacker, Pompa. As it turns out, Pompa is the father of the victim's childhood friend, and the story involved here is that he drugged and raped her 34 times while she slept over at their house between the ages of 11 and 12 years old. So his daughter's friend came over many times, and he would drug her and rape her while doing this. I should have given you the trigger warning on that one. Holy mackerel. What a story. The story below, linked here from dispatch.com, the story below shares all the horrific details of what Pompa did to this girl for years, and it almost assuredly deserves a read, but not here on the air. We're going to get to a different point. But suffice to say, the Dispatch story is offered up as proof of the allegations if you've never heard of the Brandt v. Pompa case, as I hadn't. The case, tragically, is Ohio's Pelican Brief. It's a prime reason so much money is flowing into these court races from big businesses to prop up the 3 Republican justices who sided with the pedophile, because apparently money is of far greater importance than allowing victims of childhood rape and assault the full measure of justice by a jury of their peers. Maybe at this point I would say it might pay to listen to the allegations being made in this commercial after all. Let's see. Perhaps the way to handle it is to pocket bookmark it, and then we can open it up on the big show running computer and play it with the audio of the ad so that we can figure this out here. All right, let's see. We'll get over to the original, turn up the sound, and roll it out here. All right, let's see. Hold on just a second. We got to pause it, get the sound up, and then we can go. Oh, sound up, please. All right, let's see.
It's every parent's worst nightmare. Hundreds of children are victims of sexual assault every year. But Ohio's Supreme Court treats children who were raped and assaulted the same as people in traffic accidents. Justices Pat DeWine and Pat Fisher even tried to deny a victim her day in court. DeWine and Fisher sided with pedophiles and the people who fund their campaigns instead of victims. Vote them out. Forward Justice is responsible for the content of this advertising.
All right, well, that doesn't tell us a great deal about it, but it's certainly a very forceful attack on the two named justices in this are Pat DeWine and Pat Fisher, who, in this atmosphere, it's a potent thing to say, sided with pedophiles rather than the victim. So where were we here? How did it come to this? It all goes back years, says David Pepper, to a battle over so-called tort reform, capping damages to accident victims. It's a big fight that happens all over, and there's big money involved. But in Ohio, that battle took a horrific twist when two justices, one of whom, Kennedy, not even named in the commercial, is running for Chief Justice. And Kennedy and the other justices in question here ruled that the limitations on certain damages for victims of accidents and defective products, which, whether or not you agree with them, at least we understand, whether or not they should also apply to victims of childhood rape and assault. In other words, now a civil suit by the victim against her attacker seeking damages. And these three Republican justices say, well, you can't get what you're asking for, or you might not even be allowed to ask for what you are after, because we should cap damages. Because just as we cap damages as an accident, for accident victims and victims of defective products, look, we cap damages in this state. It doesn't say that it doesn't apply to rape victims, so let's use it. That's kind of an odd approach to things, to say the least. That's right, David says. Current Ohio law treats childhood rape victims the same way as any other victim. And I guess, I don't know whether that's written into statutory law or we're saying that that's Ohio law because three justices of the Supreme Court hold that that's to be the case. And it's judge-made law. Anyway, as if there are situations in lifelong trauma child rape victims suffer are somehow similar to damages suffered by other victims, as bad as those might be. That is to say, comparing childhood sexual assault to defective products. Well, let's see. And here is a piece from OhioCapitalJournal.com, how a 2005 Ohio tort reform law has cost child rape victims millions. And apparently, I don't know whether it's going to tell us in the quick summary how it happened, whether it was an act of the legislature or judicially created interpretation of things. State Supreme Court agrees to hear second challenge to law. But, I don't know. But that deserves some additional exploration, I guess. At any rate, David says the result is so twisted that under the current approach, which suggests that it was a precedent set by judges rather than an act of the Ohio legislature, Ohio courts literally weigh evidence that a child rape or abuse victim has been able to achieve some success in life against her claim of the severe lifelong trauma and damages from childhood rape and abuse. Like, in other words, if you mentally recover, you seek counseling and get to the point where you're able to overcome some, if not all, of your trauma and get on with your life, then they say, well, in that case, you don't deserve compensation because you got over your life. Now, even if you look at it transactionally, you might say, well, it did cost me thousands upon thousands of dollars to get to this point in payments to a therapist. Can I at least recover that? I don't know how they rule on that. In the original case, the court concluded that because the victim, although the victim in this, for some reason, has a different name than earlier, but the first name, which we haven't mentioned. But because the victim had, quote, played basketball in high school and college, got good grades, etc., that weighed against her claims of severe damage from the abuse that she suffered as a teen. Wow, think about that. That's pretty sick, says David Pepper. I tend to agree. Or in this case, even though she still suffers from PTSD, depression, anxiety, nightmares, goes to counseling, struggles with crowds, etc., the lower court said that the damages were less severe because she has 2 young children, works part-time as a waitress, and had completed the necessary classes to obtain her real estate license. Thus, it appears that she is able to independently care for herself and perform life-sustaining activities. Again, WTF. No words, really. So under the Kennedy/Ohio approach, they're literally treating these victims as if they're the same as victims from accidents and faulty products, suffering the same kind of damage, even though common sense and study after study show that it is absolutely insane and insanely wrong. Using this approach, imagine what courts would say about abused gymnasts or wrestlers who went on to succeed athletically. Does the fact that they succeeded in sports reduce the lifetime of trauma they suffered from abuse? Current Ohio law basically says yes. So back to the victim in this case. After losing at the appeals or the appellate court level due to this horrific and cruel approach, where her efforts to overcome the abuse were used against her, she appealed to the Ohio Supreme Court. And as I wrote above, 3 Republican justices on your ballot this year in Ohio voted not to take her case. They voted with Pompa, the pedophile. But thanks to 4 other justices, the court did in fact take her case. It's now before the court and rooting for the victim here. But why would 3 Republican justices oppose taking the case? Why is it connected to the election and all this money being spent on TV? Here's a hint. My hint, just tell me. Besides these 2 parties to this case, in Brandt versus Pompa, and advocates of sexual assault victims pleading with the court to end this horrible approach, you'll also see that big businesses have weighed in on this case, I guess because of the limitations on damages. Here's one brief by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, NFIB, and others, National Federation of Independent Businesses is NFIB. Do they argue to keep the torts case caps, but provide exceptions for cases like the rape here, which are so clearly inapplicable? No. They argue that child rape victims, like the one in this case, should be treated this way. Among many arguments these business groups echo is the BS that the victim here is able to independently care for herself and perform life-sustaining activities. Wow. That's a pretty bare minimum. And I guess it might make some sense in product liability cases where if you say, this damaged my ability to, get along in life and earn a living because, I injured my hand. And they're like, well, that person is actually a brain surgeon now. Then you might say, well, that mitigates against a large damage award, I guess. But that's, so other states would say maybe that's something you could argue to the jury. Ohio, in its zeal for tort reform, said will overrule the jury, no matter how closely they examined the situation. But there you go. So the business groups echo this BS that because she's able to independently care for herself, she doesn't get the damages. They argue that an exception for this rape victim would, quote, severely undermine the law's predictability and effectiveness. They say that the current law overall benefits Ohio economically, so it shouldn't be disrupted by her plea. This case is apparently so important to the big boys that Dave Yost, the Ohio Attorney General, who's supposed to look out for victims, voluntarily filed a long amicus brief on behalf of the state in support of Pompa, the pedophile in this case. That's pretty amazing. And of course, what is the response to their arguments? There is so much to say, but let me try a few, says David Pepper. 1, predictability. I say we make it 100% predictable that if you rape a child in Ohio, she or he will be entitled to whatever the jury wants to award them. Economics. The economic toll taken by abuse and rape cases is astronomical. Maximum justice for victims and against pedophiles and enablers in such cases helps Ohio economically as opposed to undermining Ohio's economy. And you know what? I mean, I am of 2 minds about this even as I'm reading it, which is kind of weird for me. Well, actually, it's fairly common for me. But the idea being, if the law, or at least the state of the law, really is this and does say this, then, you at least have the argument that the 3 Republican justices are voting to say, well, I may disagree with the law, but that's what it says. On the other hand, you might also very well argue, as the 4 other justices did, we're the Supreme Court of the state. We'll tell you whether or not that law ought to be interpreted that way or not. Even if it says it should explicitly be interpreted that way, if we can differentiate, we can say so. If we feel like it's a fair and equitable and applicable test to differentiate between this sort of injury and that sort of injury, despite the fact that the law says this, we can interpret it differently. It's within our power. And the Republicans, for some reason, say, no, it isn't. It isn't within our power. Even though Republicans usually say anything is within their power, whatever it might be. And in this atmosphere, where they're lying so frequently, about any Democrat that they can put in their crosshairs and saying that person's a pedophile and you can do anything you want to stop them, except, of course, use, the polite robed activity of Supreme Court justices to declare we think that the law ought to be interpreted differently, and if the Ohio State Legislature disagrees with us, they'll have another crack at it. Republicans on the ground are running around throwing bricks through people's windows and accusing them of being vampire pedophiles. Now you find out that somebody is, despite the fact that they think they're defending the written state of the law, they are taking the side of a pedophile in a child rape case. That should be a valid attack. And suddenly they're not that interested in doing everything that they can do to protect the children anymore. Won't someone think about the children? Yes, I will, when it benefits me. I'm a gimmitarian. When it doesn't, then I can't help you, kids. Sorry. Like to help you, son, but you're too young to vote. Oh, now you're actually old enough to vote? Well, I never really liked to help you, so that whole thing was a lie. Sorry. But back to the election, as David Pepper says. If you look at your TV, one major outfit spending big dollars, big bucks, to attack Brunner, Kennedy's opponent, who voted to hear Amanda's case, by the way, Brunner did, and the Dems taking on the GOP justices who opposed this appeal, and I've given away the name of the victim in this, but again, it is a matter of public record, is Ohioans for a Healthy Economy. Oh, they're interested in this, but look close. There is some documentation provided here in screenshots attached to the tweet. If you look closely, it's basically the same groups fighting the victim in court. In fact, when they announced their support for the GOP justices, these groups even included the same logic, predictability, and stability that they used in the brief opposing the victim here. Now they're spending millions to support the it's giving her name again, anti-Amanda candidates. These business groups and their members could have easily said child rape victims like Amanda should not be subject to limits meant for other types of cases. Common sense, really. It's an argument for that. But they refused. Instead, they go all in to defeat Amanda in court and support Pompa's argument. Imagine saying, it's important for the economy for me not to be held liable here. What's so important about you? And now they go all in support for those who didn't even want to hear the case. And of course, the irony of the TV ads they're running is that they claim to be about public safety. On the other side, they're attacking Dems for being unsafe, when they are the ones arguing in court against full justice for rape victims and on the side of pedophiles. They are putting big money behind candidates who sided with them and the pedophiles against those victims. I mean, it's a fair shot these days, especially, right? By the way, the 3 GOP justices are also the same 3 who filled out surveys saying that they don't believe there's a constitutional right to privacy. So we know what they'll do when it comes up in Ohio's abortion ban. No exceptions, including for rape victims, who they won't help, even with the actual rapes themselves. So, long term, if these groups get their way in the elections, child victims of rape in Ohio get neither full justice by a jury of their peers, nor can they get abortion care if they become pregnant. Outrageous. Just to be clear, David says, I think Amanda could very well win her case. After all, there are 4 justices who agreed to hear it. It would be a massive win for justice, a true underdog story, and a reminder of why elections matter. Dems won 3 of the last 4 races. But by going all in to support of those who would have denied her appeal, those siding with Pompa are basically demanding never again. And my fear is they're looking to make sure that any win Amanda attains with the current court is temporary. That's their goal. Are you appalled? Livid? He says, I am too. So what can you do? Read on, because you can make a difference. And of course, the difference is donating to the elections for Judge Marilyn Zayas, Judge Terry Jameson, and Justice Jennifer Brunner running for Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court. So there you go. Just something to watch extra in the Supreme Court race in Ohio. I can't believe, and sometimes I can't decide whether it's a good idea that those things be elective And sometimes, I mean, we're not doing so hot on the national level with the appointed justices either. Anyway, wow. Let's see. Any other areas that we need to clear up? I guess maybe I'll go back and clean up a little bit about the proof being offered in the story of the actual story in the Paul Pelosi attack. Daniel Dale back in action, tweeting yesterday with a screenshot of the police report, I guess. Conspiracy theorists, he says, have asked why Pelosi would have been the one, Paul Pelosi, to tell the 911 dispatcher the man's name, David, and described him as a friend. That was one of the rumors that was circulating. Hey, it was, and that's in support of our crazy, stupid conspiracy theory. Why would Paul Pelosi have called the police and said, this guy is a friend of mine and his name is David? Well, the answer is in the police report. He didn't do that. So that's what the DA says. The DA says that never happened. Pelosi said he had a problem and he didn't know the man in his house. And it was DePape himself who spoke up and said that his name was David and that he was a friend. He was trying to get the dispatcher on the phone not to respond to Pelosi's call. Here is the transcript. It's reproduced here in photographic form, and you can read it for yourself. But apparently Pelosi gets a chance. He tells DePape that he has to go to the bathroom. He allows him to go into the bathroom, which is where his cell phone was charging, and he calls 911 and he says, there's a guy in my house and he's got a hammer. And then DePape overhears him calling on the phone, and Pelosi tries to sort of play it cool. Like, if I say, help, help, it's an emergency, he's going to bash me over the head immediately with the hammer. If I say, well, we're having a bit of a problem here. I'm Mr. Pelosi and there's a guy I don't know in my house with a hammer. Maybe you could do something about it. And the dispatcher on the line is, I don't know whether they're trained to sort of help diffuse that situation while pressing the panic button, because I think that's exactly what ended up happening. Saying, okay, well, we hear you, Mr. Pelosi, wink, wink. No problem. We're not going to say anything on the line that's going to alarm the attacker and make him hit you, but we are sending the police. You can be sure of that. And at some point, the dispatcher says, well, who is this person in your house? And he says, I don't know. And the guy, because he's a loony, says, I'm David. And, well, what's he doing there? And Pelosi says, I don't know him. And David says, I'm a friend of his. This conspiracy theorist seized upon that and said, why would Pelosi say he was a friend? Well, he didn't. Daniel Dale, thankfully, straightening that one out. Plus, there's also the reporting in the Washington Post on the subject. I think I have it close at hand here somewhere. But perhaps not. Oh, here it is. Capitol Police cameras caught break-in at Pelosi home, but no one was watching. This is the report filed by Aaron Davis, Carol Leonig, Mariana Sotomayor, and Paul Kane, which highlights the fact that, yes, there are Capitol Police officers involved in the protection not only of the person of the speaker, but also of the home, but they weren't watching at the moment, but also bringing out the facts about the videotape capturing the break-in and the rumors and how they got started, I guess, about the two knowing each other. That was the claim of the perpetrator in order to try and get out of being caught by police, not Paul Pelosi saying for whatever reason that he was a friend. All right. Also of interest that we didn't get to today, but probably will want to discuss tomorrow, Lindsey Graham has lost his appeal to the Supreme Court in order to avoid testifying in the Georgia election investigation cases. Rebecca Sager wrote that up over at Daily Kos yesterday, so I suggest you check that one out too, and we will dive into the at some point, I hope, the details of the result. But I guess he's back to where he started and now compelled to testify down in Georgia, though the a possibility still exists that he will just get down there and plead the fifth instead of actually answering any of the questions. And I think Justice Putnam might have covered that as early as yesterday, or may be planning to do so now. As a matter of fact, why not spend the next minute or so exiting the show with our very pleasant exit music, which we're not quite up to yet, but there we go. And now we can spend the time very calmly and patiently reading through what Justice Putnam has prepared every day, but which we usually don't get to because we're in the middle of some other story, to share with you. What's up today on Smothered Benedict Wednesdays? It's always the same on Wednesdays. He's got a whole rotating schedule. Starting off in the Bistro Cafe, it's because it's, of course, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Why would you trust somebody who jokes about the violent attack on Paul Pelosi? That is a good question. And they'll explore that at the Bistro Cafe. On the rest of the menu, in another bonehead move, Elon Musk has Twitter working on paid video features that raise potential copyright and scam concerns. That's not smart. Toxic metal pollution is apparently 10 times worse in racially segregated communities. No surprise or mystery there, but worth exploring. And Alabama voters will decide whether to ratify a new constitution that strips out the document's Jim Crow era language. Would seem to be a no-brainer, but hey, anything can happen. After the break, they move to the chef's table. You will move too. That's why it says we move to the chef's table, where Norway raised its military alert level after suspicious drone sightings put the country on edge. And Brazilian President Bolsonaro's administration signaled a willingness to hand over power 2 days after his election loss to Lula da Silva.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, how could you ask for more? Well, there may be more. All that and more on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef de Cuisine Justice Putnam. Bon appetit. It comes up next right here on Netroots Radio. We'll be back tomorrow and Friday. And hey, maybe a surprise, we might be able to rope Joan in for an appearance at the end of the week too. See you then.